For over 5 years, I had buried everything deep within myself. 5 peaceful years marked by polite smiles, casual nods at the local market, and evenings spent talking to my dog instead of another person. That night began like so many others. I'd just come back from a late walk with Buddy, my golden retriever. It was around 10:30, and the autumn air had that kind of biting chill that settles into your bones, especially when there's no one waiting for you at home. My feet throbbed, and a tightness crept up my calves. I eased myself onto the porch steps, taking in a long, steady breath before heading inside. That's when Daniel appeared. He noticed me sitting there, set down the mug he was carrying, and asked with a teasing grin, "You look like you just finished a marathon, are you okay?" I let out a soft laugh. Just the creaks and groans of aging limbs. Without hesitation, he sat down on the porch and gently took my foot into his hands. "May I?" he asked. I should have declined. I should have brushed it off with another chuckle. But I didn't. I nodded. His thumbs pressed into the arch of my foot. Warm. Sure, tender. A ripple traveled up my spine, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. On the surface, it was innocent, a simple gesture. But that night, something subtle yet undeniable shifted. The silence I had wrapped around myself for so long began to crack under the weight of it all. After Daniel left, I stayed on the porch, caught in a haze of thought. The air had turned colder, but I didn't notice. His warmth still lingered on my skin. So did the heaviness in my chest, an ache I had long forgotten. Sleep didn't come. My mind kept returning to that moment, his deliberate touch, his silence filled with unspoken things. And me, just sitting there wanting more. The next morning, the house felt different. Not physically. Everything was where it should be. But there was something intangible in the air, as though a long-closed door had quietly creaked open. I moved through my morning with a strange calm. I fed the chickens, watered the herbs on the windowsill. But I couldn't stop thinking about how naturally it had all unfolded, how dangerously easy it felt. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than a kind gesture, a brief comfort between two lonely people. Yet deep down, my heart whispered another story. It started small. Daniel began showing up with eggs from his coop or bringing soup when he heard my cough echo through the walls. I'd invite him in, just for a moment, offering him tea and a sliver of conversation. He'd talk about his mother, the weight of starting a business in a town where everyone knows everyone. I listened. I've always been a good listener. Minutes stretched into hours. His eyes held mine a little longer when I laughed. He brushed a strand of hair behind my ear like he'd done it 1,000 times before. One stormy night, the power cut out. Candles flickered to life. We sat close, wine in hand, our knees nearly touching. In the soft glow, I confessed something I hadn't dared to say aloud, that sometimes I crave the feeling of being held more than the idea of being loved. He said nothing, just looked at me, still and steady. And in that silence, the line between us began to blur. One Saturday evening, after folding laundry, I poured myself some chamomile tea. I thought I was alone, until I heard a gentle knock at the door. Daniel stood there, his hair damp with rain, holding a broken umbrella, and wearing that sheepish smile I'd grown to recognize too well. "I saw your porch light," he said quietly. I didn't want to be alone tonight. There was something in his voice that softened my resolve. I let him in, wearing nothing but my old robe and worn slippers. We sat on the couch. He didn't say much, just looked at me like he was searching for something. Maybe permission. I turned away, pretending I didn't notice the weight of the silence between us. But then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed me. It was slow, hesitant, not fueled by passion, but by something more fragile, like he wasn't sure if he was crossing a line. And I let him. I should have pulled back. I could have, but I didn't. And that choice rewrote everything. Long after he left, I could still feel the kiss. It clung to my lips like a question I didn't know how to answer. The next day, I wandered the house like a ghost, my fingertips grazing the place he'd sat, washing the cup he'd held. The memory stayed with me, not just what happened, but how it made me feel. Alive, for the first time in years. But guilt followed close behind. Not just for what had occurred, but for the part of me that longed for it to happen again. I kept reminding myself, he's too young. He's just lonely. You know better. But those reminders faded quickly, especially at night, when the house fell silent and loneliness curled around me like a familiar coat. I should have created space, should have drawn a line. But every time I considered it, I remembered what it felt like to be seen again, to be wanted. And my heart, foolish and hopeful, refused to let go. As twilight fell and the wind picked up, I stood in the kitchen, staring into the darkened yard. A sudden knock broke the silence. It was him, Daniel, standing in the doorway, rain clinging to his coat, his expression soft, like he'd spent all day wrestling with something too big to carry alone. We didn't speak. The silence between us was different now. Full. Intimate. "Last night keeps playing in my head," he said, his voice low, almost fragile. I wanted to tell him it couldn't happen again. I meant to, but instead, I stepped aside and let him in. It wasn't until his hand found mine, warm, trembling, that I realized how hard my heart was pounding. "I'm trying to be strong," I confessed, my eyes welling with tears. "I can't do this alone anymore." And then, without thought or hesitation, I reached for him, wrapped myself in the safety of his arms, surrendering to the warmth of someone who made me feel seen again, as though I still mattered. As he held me, it wasn't out of pity. It wasn't an act born from duty. It was something far more primal, a mutual need, an unspoken understanding. His desire, I realized, might not be so different from my own. Silence wrapped around us like a blanket, more eloquent than any words we could have exchanged. He pulled me closer, his breath grazing the side of my neck, his hands trembling slightly, as though he too was overwhelmed by what was happening between us. And yet, even as our bodies leaned into one another, my thoughts recoiled. What am I doing? He's younger. He's only a neighbor. This isn't how I thought comfort would find me. But I didn't stop him. Not when his lips brushed against mine. Not when my fingers found his in the dark. Not even when the ache I had buried so long ago surged back, flooding every part of me. In one fragile moment, I nearly whispered we shouldn't. But my heart had already wandered past that line. It waited in the shadows, aching to be acknowledged, chosen, touched, and I let it all happen. Before dawn, I was wide awake, cocooned in the silence of early morning and the weight of what had just occurred. His shirt lay folded neatly on the couch, my robe slightly open at the collar. The wine glasses still sat untouched from the night before, cradling the last drops of quiet we had shared. I stood at the window, watching the horizon, waiting for the sunrise to explain how I should feel. But all it offered was light, bare and unfiltered, and I wasn't sure I was ready for such clarity. Behind me, I felt him stir. His hand brushed my back, hesitant, searching, perhaps for forgiveness, or maybe just a sign that it was okay to stay. "This wasn't supposed to happen," I said quietly, almost to myself. He didn't speak. He looked at me in a way that made it clear he understood too well, as if he had also lived through evenings masked with smiles and filled with emptiness. I stood, but my legs faltered, not from regret, but from something closer to revelation. I should have said we need to stop. I should have drawn a line. Instead, I turned to him and whispered, "I don't want to be alone anymore." Then I folded into him, as though I had nowhere else left to go. Maybe I didn't. The house returned to silence. He had gone out for a walk, or maybe he, too, needed time to think. I didn't ask. I sat with my coffee, my finger tracing the rim of the cup again and again. Everything around me looked the same, but I wasn't. His breath still lingered against my skin. The echo of my words, "I can't be alone anymore," weighed heavily inside me, like something sacred I hadn't meant to share. But it had been there for years, waiting to be heard. What happens now? I'm not a girl anymore, swept away by the thrill of romance. I'm a woman who's folded too many solo dinners into quiet nights, who's laughed less than she used to, who once stopped believing someone would ever look at her like that again. Should I pretend nothing happened? Should I retreat and protect what's left of my peace? Or dare I believe that maybe, just maybe, something real can grow from the most unexpected of moments? The truth is, I don't know. What I do know is I'm not the same woman I was yesterday. After he left, I sat alone. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, the only sound in the room. His hand still lived on my fingertips. A warmth bloomed quietly in my chest. Tender, not painful, as though something inside me had stirred from a long sleep, and was unsure where to go next. Maybe the night didn't change me. Maybe it just reminded me of the woman I had once been. As the sun rose, casting its golden light through the bare branches, I caught my reflection in the window pane, older, wiser, and still holding on to desire. I whispered to no one, "I can't carry this alone anymore." I wasn't sure if I meant the dawn that had just broken, or the life waiting on the other side of it. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I didn't. All I know is I felt alive again. Have you ever crossed a line you never thought you would, only to discover a more honest version of yourself waiting on the other side? If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Let's talk. And if you'd like to walk with me a little further on this path, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. This journey is just beginning.